One of the NBA's biggest superstars is ready to move on from Portland. What does that mean for Dallas Mavericks new GM Nico Harrison and potentially trying to acquire Damian Lillard? This is the Gray Area right here on Kevin Gray Sports. My name is Kevin Gray. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. And you can catch you on your home of the Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers, 105.3 The Fan. Per Henry Abbott of True Hoop, it sounds like Damian Lillard is officially ready to request a trade out of Portland, which is interesting because he has a 4-year, $176 million contract extension that will kick in at the beginning of this upcoming season during his age 31 season. Damian Lillard's lack of playoff success throughout his time in Portland may be a driving factor in him wanting to potentially get out of Portland, given the fact that they have not been able to successfully build a consistent playoff contender that could get deep into the playoffs over the last few years. It sounds like Damian Lillard may be wanting out of Portland at this point. Grant Asseff of Sports Illustrated has talked about the idea that, per sources telling him, Damian Lillard could look to try and get to the New York Knicks if he does officially request a trade. Other teams like the Golden State Warriors, the Philadelphia 76ers, maybe even the Dallas Mavericks could find themselves trying to get into the sweepstakes for one Damian Lillard. Now, don't get me wrong. It would be very difficult for the Dallas Mavericks to try and pull off a trade to acquire Damian Lillard. You have one guy in Kristaps Porzingis who's owed over $100 million over the next 3 seasons, a guy that right now you could only get 60 cents on the dollar from anyway, even if you try to move on from him. And it sounds like from Mark Cuban and GM Nico Harrison and new head coach Jason Kidd, doesn't sound like the Mavericks are willing to move off of Kristaps Porzingis right now anyway.
I said it earlier, I think we're excited about KP being healthy. I think he's excited, he's ready to work, and I think you're going to see a different KP.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think I can add much more than what Jason said. I think he said it perfectly.
Yeah, I would like to add something on KP. I think he's been unfairly maligned. You know, during the playoffs, he did exactly what he was asked to do. Exactly. He put team first, and he put his own personal statistics, knowing that people were going to give him a hard time because, as he said to me and others, he just wants to win. And to Jay Kidd's point and Nico's point, this is going to be the first season with the Dallas Mavericks where he's coming in healthy. And he's able to work on things other than just rehabbing to get his body ready, to get stronger, to work on his game, something he has not been able to do. And, you know, I think, you know, I even hear from my own son, and I've got to sit him down and say, you don't understand, right? You know, to Jay Kidd's point, he's, you know, you can't teach 7'4", and you can't teach shooting. You can't teach his ability to create shots. But now he's going to have a chance to have some continuity, and that's something he has not had since he's effectively been a rookie. And so I think, you know, with what Jay Kidd and Nico have planned, the ability for KP to work, you know, I think him and Luka are going to be a lot better together. And as a team, to Nico's point, I think you're going to see a lot of things that are going to make us far better as a team.
Given the fact that they have re-emphasized and reinforced the idea that Porzingis was only doing what was asked of him during the playoffs, and that lack of success in the playoffs was due not because he wasn't able to be the kind of player they thought he could be, but because he was limited by what he was being asked to do by former head coach Rick Carlisle. Now, you could debate that all you want to, depending on what happens with Porzingis this upcoming season. But back to Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard now has an opportunity to potentially find himself in a brand new situation, but more importantly, the connections to Dallas are deep. You remember that famous video that's going around right now when, of course, he said bye-bye to your man Paul George and sending them home during the playoffs a few years ago. One of the first people that he went up to after celebrating that knockdown three-pointer was new GM for the Dallas Mavericks, Nico Harrison. So Nico Harrison, who has talked about the idea that his relationships run very deep from the grassroots level all the way to the professional level. 19 years and as an executive at Nike puts you in the room in the conversations with some of the biggest names in all of sports, including, of course, the late Kobe Bryant. Here's Nico Harrison talking about the idea that not only his relationships that he's forged over those 19 years at Nike, but also throughout the grassroots of basketball all the way to the very top of its profession will help serve him in trying to change the culture and help build something that would attract stars to come to Dallas. Here's what Nico Harrison had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's my relationships extend even broader than that. 19 years in basketball, like I have relationships that go across the industry from grassroots to college to professional. So, people tend to think about the big time pros and all that. And yeah, that was a part of what I did. But really my relationships are broader than that. And I think it's going to serve me well in this position.
So Nico Harrison saying, look, my relationships aren't just about what it is for these stars at the NBA level. It's all over basketball in general, which will serve him well, obviously. The transferable skills for being able to identify and try to close in on bringing talent to Nike is something that I'm sure Mark Cuban will look to draw upon when it comes to Nico Harrison. Harrison also on 105.3 The Fan talked about the idea that when teams call the Dallas Mavericks, he will be the one picking up the phone. Ultimately, what Mark Cuban does with the information that is disseminated to him from Nico Harrison and Michael Finley and others, whom also Nico Harrison said will be his right-hand man going forward in the Mavericks front office, will be up to Cuban because, as he has stated, he is ultimately the one that's going to be making the basketball decisions. But when you start looking at the Mavericks and any kind of idea to putting together some kind of trade package to maybe get a Damian Lillard, you're probably going to have to get multiple teams involved and think about future draft picks down the road. Now, remember, this is a team in the Mavericks that does not own a draft pick in this year's NBA draft at all. Then you start looking at 2022. Yes, they have their first and second round picks there, but in 2023, they do keep their pick if it's 1 through 10, but if it's 11 through 30, it goes to the New York Knicks. Same in 2024. Then in 2025, you own your 1st through 10th pick if it is in that range. If it's 11 to 30, the New York Knicks would have it if it's not already settled by them. 2026, you own your picks. 2027, you own your picks. So we're talking about pick swaps and future draft picks and selections down the road. But more importantly, do you even have the kind of assets and tradable players right now that Portland would even want to bring in for their team in exchange for Damian Lillard? That's the major question. And when you pair that already with the idea that this Mavericks team seems to not to want to move off of Kristaps Porzingis, the lack of draft assets that you have currently, plus what are you going to do this year in your salary cap situation where you could get to over $30 million in cap space, but you have decisions to make on guys like Tim Hardaway Jr., who you may decide to bring back, who's an unrestricted free agent. Josh Richardson, who has a player option, who I would be shocked if he didn't opt into that near $12 million option going into this upcoming year. Some financial flexibility could be lost depending on certain decisions made by this franchise with respect to Tim Hardaway Jr. and if Josh Richardson decides to opt in. Now you say, Kevin, you could move on from Josh Richardson in a trade at some point also to get him off the books. And yes, I do understand that. But the Mavericks now have to put themselves in position to where they are in these kinds of conversations with the major players, especially when names like Damian Lillard come up. And for Nico Harrison, these are the kinds of things that Mavericks fans expect to see in terms of their team being mentioned when it comes to these kinds of stars being up when they decide to request for trades. Because ultimately, they are not in a position to add to themselves in the draft. They have gone down the road of bringing in Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd based on the kinds of relationships that both of them have throughout the NBA and what that means to build immediately around a superstar in Luka Doncic at 22 years of age who's ready to win now. So when you look at the entire totality of the situation, is a Damian Lillard in play for the Dallas Mavericks? Maybe, maybe not. You can do all kinds of salary cap gymnastics and move all kinds of things around to try and make these things happen. But ultimately, when teams talk to the Dallas Mavericks, it's going to be about who are we talking to, who ultimately is going to make the final decision around here, and can we get a deal done with this new regime potentially to move in a direction where we would want to work with the Mavericks going forward. All of those things have to be answered in the coming days and weeks. But for Nico Harrison and this Mavericks organization, this is the kind of time when free agency starts on August 2nd that they need to find themselves in. They need to find themselves in the conversations and the talks when it comes to superstars like Damian Lillard potentially being available, when it comes to free agents this upcoming summer, whether or not you want to spend the kind of money that you think you may have in order to try and build around Luka Doncic, or you wait until 2022 to try and wait for some bigger names to potentially come up to try and put yourself in position to go there, or try to acquire a Bradley Beal. Whatever the names that you want to come up with, these are the times now that the Mavericks brought in Nico Harrison for, and that's to try and build a culture that would attract guys to want to come to play for the Dallas Mavericks. Here is Nico Harrison talking more about the idea of what he sees as the opportunity to be able to do so when it comes to building a championship culture around the Dallas Mavericks, and what he expects, and more so with Jason Kidd also.
My approach is really simple. It's going to be about servant leadership that kind of empowers the team and the staff to be at their best. And I believe that's essential and super important. Communication, communicating often, communicating truthfully. I think that's a very important ingredient. And then a culture that everybody wants to be a part of. The fans want to be a part of, the staff wants to be a part of, and the team wants to be a part of. And I think if you have those three ingredients, you're going to win. I really do.
So for Nico Harrison, it's going to be extremely important to build what he believes his approach is to building a culture that is worth players and stars wanting to come here. That ultimately is what we're doing here, right? You heard all the press conference information. You don't know exactly what's going to be happening with Bob Voulgaris. You don't necessarily know what's going to be happening with Kristaps Porzingis, even though I think he's going to stay around. But for Nico Harrison, this is the reason why you were brought in. Damian Lillard may be out of the question. Maybe. But it shouldn't be out of the realm of conversation now, because this is exactly what you brought in Nico Harrison for. It is going to be up to the Dallas Mavericks to execute on what they believe is going to be their strategy going forward, because they don't have the kind of draft assets to be able to move around to build to the draft. And more importantly, if you're going to try to go down this road of stars, you better find yourself in these conversations right now. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to hit that subscribe button right there for all things Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. It's been another episode of The Gray Area. We'll talk to you later. Peace.